Last morning together, last couple hours together. Greetings to those who have hopefully rejoined us online after I said something about not using bullet points and the screen went blank and everybody dropped offline. I don't know if it was because of guilt or or they didn't know what to do without bullet points. I don't know. But anyway, it's been great to have you with us, and hopefully you've learned a few things and learned a few more things, probably learned some things that you didn't know would be helpful to know, learned some things that you're sorry you did learn, and hopefully a few things that you will use now and again. So let's have a word of prayer. We'll get the day started and see what we can figure out. Lord, we thank you for a new day, new opportunity to serve you. Thank you for each one who is joining us here as well as online. We thank you that we have this opportunity to gain some knowledge of how to use some tools to effectively communicate the things that we do know about you and your word, and to effectively communicate those things visually to have the most impact. And so we pray your blessing on our time together in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so yesterday I taught you more about color than you ever wanted to know in your entire life. Talked about the color wheel, and there's different ways of looking at the color wheel. In this particular instance, this is the color wheel that you grew up learning, where you have well, the colors are off a little bit, so it's a little bit hard to tell. But so you have, in this case, yellow. Normally you think of the primary colors as yellow, red, and blue. And so yesterday I talked about the fact that there are actually two other color wheels. One that has to do with projecting color. That's what you see on the screen, that are made up of certain colors. Then those colors that are used in your printer for printing. And then there's a third one that we didn't even talk about, and that is what happens when you go to paint your house and you want to mix two colors together, and you actually have a whole third set of colors that you've got what are considered primary colors. The red, green, and blue are those colors that we grew up learning with our watercolors, that you mix yellow and blue and you get green. That's what we grew up learning. The other two we never even thought about, and then wondered why we had to buy ink cartridges that were CYMK. What in the world is CYMK? So anyway, but there are things to think about in terms of color schemes and how certain colors work together better than others, and some can work against one another in a certain way to create certain effects. And these are things that a designer wants to keep in mind, and I'll give you some examples. So you have primary colors, then the secondary colors, which are made up of a combination of the three primary colors, and then tertiary colors, tertiary meaning three, which are the ones that are made up of combinations of secondary and primary colors. Now, what has this got to do with anything? Well, you're about to find out, I hope. Colors that sit across from one another on the color wheel are called complementary colors. So these are examples of complementary colors. And again, part of it has to do with this lighting. If you were looking at my computer screen, it would be completely obvious. It's not nearly as obvious, because this is being projected and reflected, as opposed to me looking at something directly that's being projected. It looks right here, it doesn't always look right there, because you've got two different things going on. But for the sake of argument alone, I can tell you that on my screen, that is a very deep red. Okay? I know it doesn't look that way, but take my word for it. So you have red and green. Those are complementary colors. Blue and orange are complementary colors. Yellow and violet or purple are complementary colors. And then you have this odd little beast that is called a split complementary, where you take color on one side of the color wheel, and instead of using the single color directly opposite it, you use two of the adjacent colors. So it's called a split complementary. And there are different ways that they are used, and we find them both in printing, and we actually find them in various combinations in nature that you probably in many cases never thought of before. So God uses complementary colors in certain ways. So Christmas frequently uses complementary colors. The poinsettia is made up of complementary colors, the red and the green. That's what we associate with Christmas. Also, there are certain ways that you use complementary colors for design purposes. Now, here's something very interesting. Notice that it's not just a matter of being complementary, opposite one another on the color wheel. It depends on where they are on the color wheel, the effect that they generate. So again, whoops, we'll go get there for in a second. So complementary colors has a certain feel, a certain effect. These two are complementary colors. There are actually only two colors on that poster, and they are just light and dark variations on those two colors. But the feel is very, very different, isn't it? Still, here, I keep doing this. Here you only have two colors, basically. It has one kind of feel. Here you have two colors completely different. First one, you think about Christmas. When you see these two colors used in combination, you think hot and cold, fire and ice, right? So it gives that feel. Now, depending on how they are used, even just using those same two colors can have a different effect. The same two colors, these same two colors, or very close to these same two colors, are going to be used on the next screen, but actually it's going to have a completely different visual effect. When they're just used solid, they're not variations, light and dark variations, they're still just the same two colors. And again, I mentioned on the first day that, you know, the question arises, do I have to be a artistic or a good graphic designer to create good graphics? No, not necessarily. The time was when, yes, that you did. And it's not that it doesn't hurt now, but there are so many things that are available out there. So many ways to gain ideas. You can at least say, that looks good and this looks bad, or this looks good but this looks better. As long as you can make that determination, and then the process is simply learning to analyze why something works a certain way and why something else doesn't work as well. So it's a matter of comparing rather than just coming up with something from scratch. And the truth is, I steal from other thieves all the time. If I'm going to start creating a new course, or even if I'm going to create one slide, there are so many millions and millions and millions of images out on Google now. Whether they be magazine covers or slides or whatever they might be, you can get a place to start. I'm not saying you copy exactly what somebody else does, but if I wanted to come up with something where I needed this idea of fire and ice, actually with the tags that they tie to pictures, sometimes you can just look for concepts like specific colors and it will bring up things like this. Now, using the same color scheme, two completely different fields, magazine designers do the same thing. Essentially the same two colors, different shades of the same two colors. And once again, a completely different feel. So here is a magazine that's being marketed apparently to women. That's what you would guess from the way it's put together. But it's not just marketing for magazines. Here you have Cheetos using the same color scheme, complementary colors on the color wheel. Now, interestingly, Cheetos only uses this color scheme for its puffs. It uses a different color scheme for its crinkles. Is that what the other one is? I can't remember. The regular. Now, here are complementary colors. This time, it's not the blue and the orange, but it's the yellow and the purple, or yellow and violet. Completely different feel, right? Now, again, you're always thinking about your target audience. This works great if your target audience is kids. But you're probably not going to impress multimillionaire CEOs if this is what your entire presentation looks like. Why is that? Why do our brains work that way? Probably partly because of conditioning. We've been conditioned as to what works together and what you use in certain situations. So here you have another example. It's also used in interior design. Here you have complementary colors, not just on bags of Cheetos and not just on magazine covers, but if you happen to have these kinds of skills, or you've developed these, you can also use them even with interior design. It gives your home, or maybe a particular room, a particular feel. You would use another color combination to get a different feel in a different room, not necessarily complementary colors, but these are made up of basically complementary colors and then light and dark variations on those colors. Here's an example of a slide that I created for my main title slides for each of the dispensations in my course, God's Plan Through the Ages. Which, by the way, may be the course that I'll be doing when we have our next conference. We still have to make some final decisions this morning. But what I've done is, as you can see, I have used complementary colors, and they stand out. So my title itself stands out against a background, but the background is very familiar, and it works. Actually, they work together, even though they're essentially on opposite sides of the color wheel. Another example from the same course, Satan's Apparent Victory. There are multiple apparent victories by Satan through history, looking at it from his perspective, sometimes from a human perspective. They aren't ultimate victories, but they are temporary apparent victories. When he gets Eve and Adam to disobey God, then you have a temporary victory. So here, once again, complementary colors, just like the previous one, but the feel is completely opposite, isn't it? Completely different feel. Analogous colors are colors that are close to one another or adjacent to one another on the color wheel. And we see these used all the time as well. God does it in nature. These are analogous colors. Colors that, as you can see, are adjacent to one another on a color palette. So peaches use complementary colors. Apples frequently use, not complementary, analogous. Apples frequently use what? Complementary colors. So different fruits are used in different ways, and they both look good in their own way, right? A sunset made up of analogous colors. Colors that are along the same side of the color wheel. Actually, I think this has been This picture's actually been photoshopped a little bit. I didn't do it, but I suspect it's been photoshopped a little bit. But you can do that to enhance certain effects. More analogous colors. Just along the spectrum, along the same side of the color wheel. And they can be fairly far apart, but the further apart you get, then you start moving from analogous to complementary. And you may have some combination of both in your picture. But these are decisions that you have to make as a designer when you're designing a poster, a flyer, a book cover, or a slide. Think about these colors. These are analogous colors. Why were these colors chosen by the now defunct TWA for this poster for Egypt? Why would these colors have been chosen? Are they the same colors that somebody would have chosen if they were flying to Brazil? No. Completely different set of colors. You would have used analogous colors probably, but at a different place along the color wheel. This gives you the feel of sand, hot, dry, those kinds of things. So just as complementary colors might be used on a magazine cover, here you have analogous colors used on a magazine cover. And to great effect. It's just as effective as the other, it's just a different style choice. And those are the kinds of decisions that you need to make when you're putting together your slide presentation. Thinking about putting together a slide presentation, one of the things that I talked about was continuity and harmony. If you're wanting to be really disruptive with your audience, you jump back and forth. You jump all over the place. So one slide is complementary, the next slide is analogous. You jump all over the place, or you move around the color wheel, and you'll create a really jarring effect really quickly. But if you're trying to keep some continuity, let's say you're within a section, you might want to stay with one set of colors or one place along the color wheel for this section, and then when you move to a new topic, you change your combinations that you use. You might change which complementary colors you use. You may move to a different place around the color wheel depending on the effect that you're trying to achieve. So one of the things that you find, for example, going back to the two slides from God's Plan Through the Ages, my students get three visual clues. When a new dispensation comes along, that same slide is going to come up with just a different word for the dispensation, but the colors are all the same. The only thing that's different is the name of the dispensation. And I also have a particular sound that I play alongside it. Now you've got, with everything it's moderation, okay? But there's a certain, I think it's like 5-second clip of sound that I found or created that I use every time I switch dispensations. The same thing happens when you come to God's Apparent Victory. In fact, the sound starts playing just before the things start moving on screen. So they know what's coming already a split second before they actually see it. And so what happens is these are triggers that you are creating, and what do these amount to? They're mnemonic devices. One of the things a good teacher will do will be to use devices that help students remember certain things that they're wanting them to remember, and that usually happens through repetition. And if you're repeating it so there are three ways it's being repeated. It's being repeated by sound, by color, and the same or similar words, plus the image. So I guess you could say there are four things. So that gives you a very powerful mnemonic device. Students are not going to forget that by the end of the class. There's Cheetos Crunchy. Here they use analogous. For their other brand, the Puffs, they used complementary. Here, for whatever reason, their designer decided that Crunchy was it was good to use analogous. But think about this, the effect that you get with this set of analogous colors, that package would look completely different if you were using this set of analogous colors, right? So some things, there is no right or wrong answer. Some things are really right and wrong answers, and you've got to kind of learn to decide which is which. Here's analogous colors that I use for another slide from God's Plan Through the Ages, a slide that I created. This one I did not do completely in PowerPoint, although I did mostly in PowerPoint. Or did I? No, actually I did. I did the whole thing in PowerPoint. I showed you yesterday how to create a vignette with a soft edge. I just found a picture of a lion, did an oval vignette around it, softened the edges, and put it on the background of a sunset with a storm in the background. And it worked well. So you have analogous colors in the lion as well as in the sky. And then use the storm cloud itself as a place to put the title. Mm-hmm.
So you've got three different pictures there. You've got the lion, and you've got the sunset, and the storm was moving in, or the sunset picture you had?
I think the sunset picture had the lightning already in it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Another one from the same course. In this case, using complementary colors, found a picture of the Roman Colosseum lit up at night, and the lights that they used created an orange glow, and so I used those colors for the title at the top. So I used yellow, there's yellow, and there's an orangish color, and you have them set against a blue background. So you have contrast, so you have an analogy between the colors in the Colosseum and then contrast between the colors in the Colosseum. So you actually have two different things happening at the same time. And again, they just create some effects that are fairly memorable, and that's what you're hoping to do. Then there are monochromatic. These are light and dark variations of the same color. And there are places to do that. Here's an example of the Egypt poster printed on, as if it were printed on just a regular laser printer. You may not have access to a color printer, but in certain cases you can get away with, and you will be using just your laser printer at home or at work to create monochromatic. Now, this is a grayscale monochromatic, but that's not the only kind of monochromatic. It's light and dark of any combination of colors. So let's say that you don't have a color printer and you really like the design here, but you only have a laser printer. Well, this is actually monochromatic as well, but what have you changed? The color of paper that you're printing on. So you get something that's similar, has sort of the same effect that would work with kids, and it's cheaper than printing a bunch of the four-color posters, especially if you're doing a lot of flyers, or if you don't need to make very many, you're just wanting to run off a few, or depending on what you want. Sometimes you can get away with monochrome and it'll work just fine. But you have to admit that the feel that this has is completely different than if the paper color had been pink, right? Or yellow by itself. Yellow, it just wouldn't have worked as well as going with that color of paper. Here's monochromatic being used in a home. The last one we saw as part of interior design was complementary, where you had violet and yellow. Here you have different shades of violet, light and dark variations on the same color. Creates a completely different feel. Here's something that I've used primarily monochromatic. This is again from my course, God's Plan Through the Ages. So, of all the cool things I've ever found on the internet, an albino cobra was one of the better ones. So it is one of those things where you find it and you go, I can't believe I found this. So anyway, I use it at several places in the presentation. But what we have is primarily monochromatic, but along the bottom, this title is dramatic. Red gives it gives a feeling of blood, right? And it dramatically stands out against both black and white. You have to use red in moderation, usually, but in certain cases it can be very effective. And again, what you're seeing is not as dramatic as what it actually shows here, which is why I really like teaching in places that have televisions rather than projectors, because the effect, as you will see here, is really dramatically different. See? Which is why I'm trying to talk my church out of a projector and to go with 80-inch TVs. But that's another debate. Another thing that I used, this is another effect that I used. This doesn't have to do with color, but it does have to do with bringing things on and off the screen. So actually I set the background with Jesus, with the snake, and that's all on what's called the master layer. It's sitting in the background. And I'm actually, what's here is sitting on the foreground, and I'm using an effect where I'm just moving the foreground. Everything in the background stays the same. So it keeps everything from moving all at once. Again, you've got to use movement. Everything needs to be, unless you're trying to create something dramatic, less is usually more. So just change the title. And again, this is just done completely in PowerPoint. And then we're not going to get into this real deep, but there are other combinations of color as well. Triangular, rectangle, square colors. So a triangular color scheme, as you can see on the color wheel, a combination of those three colors. There's a place, time and place for everything. Not everything works in every situation as well as it does in others. But as you can see, there are really all kinds of things that you can do. And then, again, not only is it just this particular relationship of the colors on the color wheel, as you rotate that around the color wheel, the feel of the whole picture will change, or the whole composition. Then you have pure colors versus tints, shades, and tones. And this gets really into a lot of more theory than anything. So I'll just point this out to you just so you understand what we're talking about. So pure colors, this is really red. I know it doesn't look red up there, but it's actually pure red. So you have red and blue. Those are pure colors. Tints are if you add white to a color, shades are if you add black to a color, and tones are variations between colors. And something that I didn't point out yesterday, but you may have wondered what was going on whenever you pull up something like this in PowerPoint and you see this red, green, and blue. The red, green, and blue, once again, those are the three colors. Every little, like if you have a, let's say your laptop screen is 1980 by 1024. That means they're 1,980 pixels wide by 1,024 pixels high, and every one of those pixels is made up of an LED, of 3 LEDs, red, green, and blue. So those are really small, obviously. And now the high resolution monitors, like mine, is like 3,800 wide, so it's an incredible number of pixels in there. But your eyes can only distinguish between so many colors. In fact, if you set these all to, these will all go from 0 to 255. And so you multiply those three, 256 square, cubed, thank you. I am an engineer, by the way. If it cubed, you get that 16,777,000 whatever. The fact is, like I said yesterday, it's far more than your eyes can actually perceive. Far more. So there will never be any reason to ever create a computer monitor or a television that has more than 256 variations of those three colors. You get white by turning them all on completely, and you get black by turning them all off completely. And if these were all set to 100 and you changed one of them by just 1 to 101, your eye would never see the difference. So it's a far higher ability than the human eye has the capacity to see. So another thing that you can do, if you're thinking, one of the things that I talked about yesterday was generally try to go more subtle and more subdued and more toward the gray scale, unless you're really trying to get somebody's attention. Generally, less is more when it comes to color. So if you go to all the way to the top here, then the blue would be 255. And then if you started moving down, that number would start dropping. This would start moving as well, and so you can make adjustments on here to light and darkness. Generally, when I'm doing most of my designing for most of my slides, I very seldom get above roughly this area when I'm designing anything, unless I'm doing it for a specific effect to create a dramatic effect. I tend to stay on the grayscale side. Now, another thing that you're up against a little bit is that there are changing sensibilities and standards in the publishing business or in the advertising business or what people are used to seeing. But you can tell pretty quickly if a slide was designed in 2000 versus 2015, or if a book was printed in 1995 versus 2015, because there are differences in sensibilities. I really ran into this issue as far as differences of sensibilities because it's not just time, it's also culture. So sensibilities for culture, for example, between India versus the United States are far, far different. In India or the Philippines, they tend to be very, very bright colors. So during the year that I ended up needing to do some freelance work to make up for lost support when we come back from Hungary, I found myself initially having to bid jobs out where I'd make $5 or $6 an hour, because there's always somebody on the other side of the world willing to work for that amount and do well if he did that. But anybody, any businessman though, who was getting very much freelance work done on the internet, found out very quickly he needed to find out where the guy was. Not because he wasn't a good designer, but because he didn't have American business sensibilities when it came to putting colors together. So even though by being willing to come in at a low price to establish my reputation and my ranking and all that, I was quickly able to get back up into a competitive range that I could work on. So it's not just time, it's cultures and a lot of other things come into effect as well. Did I see a hand back here a minute ago? Yeah. Yeah. My guess is they probably use a little bit brighter colors. I don't know that for sure. But I would say this too. In that situation, they're going to be much more concerned with your content than there are bright colors. And having too much color is always more inappropriate than having less color than might be normally used. It's always, you very seldom mess up going on the conservative side when you're doing stuff like that. All right, we've all seen these. Bad text and background color combinations. So it's not going to be as effective for you as it is for me. So again, because we're looking at a projection and it's being washed out by light. But just like we said yesterday, we made some promises about not using bullet points or something like that. Get ready to make some more promises. All right, you ready? Never, ever use these color combinations under any circumstances. Now, if you use a drop shadow, honestly, if you use a drop shadow and outlines in a specific circumstance for a specific reason, intentionally, maybe. Probably not, okay? That's just one. Has anybody ever seen a PowerPoint put together with it looks something like that? Yes, we all have. Whoa. Well. We're going to dig into this a little bit deeper and get him into a lot of trouble. Okay. I mean, it hurts, doesn't it? Oh, how do you do that? If you think it looks bad on there, you should see it here. Yeah, I know. All right, and one more just for the fun of it. Yes, you can read it.
But it's harsh.
But you know, and here's something that's interesting. You know, if it hits you, but these are Christmas colors.
Yes.
And used correctly with shading and things like that, and pulling down, you know, the brightness and different things like that, you can make them work. But just by itself, don't do that to your Sunday school class. Just. We got a promise, and we'll have a talk with your pastor, okay? Or whoever designs his slides. Oh, a minute, there is another one. Yes, there is another one. Oh, you can't tell how bad this one is. I have to show you that. I have to show you this one. Isn't that lovely? Yeah. Yeah, the screen doesn't do that justice. All right, this is another question. Light text on dark or dark text on light? There isn't a right answer always. there are some general rules of thumb to use. One of the things that you notice in this room, the ambient light has a lot to do with what you can get away with and still look halfway decent. Because of the ambient light, the only thing that's black up here are the edges. On my screen, this is completely black. It's because all the LEDs are turned off. But because we're getting ambient light reflecting off the screen, you can't get a pure black when you're projecting. Another reason to use televisions, if anybody's listening. So, I've been in situations where I have learned to adjust and find out ahead of time. Like when I travel to the Philippines, I can almost be 100% certain I'm not going to be using a television to project on. And I'll probably be using a projector where the light bulb is way past 50% of its life, and the ambient light, there are no curtains on the windows. So you just, like it or not, you've got to go with dark on light. Usually light on dark, there are a lot more things you can do with pictures and things like that, but sometimes you just have to go with what is dictated. Now this works fairly well because it is dark enough to give us some sense of that being black, but I can show you. See if I can do this without. There. So you can see that when it was being projected in the right setting, that it would have looked better. One of the things that you can do if you're setting up in an auditorium and you're thinking about setting up a screen is put it into a place that's behind most of your ambient lighting. Try to get it into a darkened, recessed area and have very little light coming straight down from the top onto it. If I had baffles on these lights right here to cut some of this light coming right straight onto it, it would come out a lot better. So these are kinds of things that you need to think about when you are setting things up. Another thing is the use, a good use of outlines. Most of the time you don't need or want to use outlines on most text, but in certain cases it's helpful. So I wanted to use green in connection with the planet, and so I put a white outline on it to make it stand out. If there were no outline on this text right here, it would look awful. But again, less is more. You have to just be thinking about when to use and when not to use outlining. Here another slide from God's plan through the ages, the Tower of Babel. Here we have light text or dark text on a light background. Again, this doesn't show up so well on the televisions that I'm normally projecting on. This shows up, the red shows up well because it fades almost to black at the bottom. So you have two different examples. You have light text on dark, and in this one you have dark text on light. And another thing, again, you want to make sure that your text is not competing against your background. So you've got to do things to create spaces for text if the picture doesn't already have them. Now the text, this particular picture, actually it's a pretty cool picture that I happened to find, but its proportions were different. So I wanted to fill up the screen as much as possible, and I had already decided that I wanted to use each side of it for text. So I created my place for text there. But the picture was far too bright toward the bottom, so I had to create a place for my text by creating a gradient black at the bottom. So there are multiple things that you want to do. What you don't want to have happen is have your text competing against your background so that it makes it hard to see the text for one reason or another. In this one, this is a picture from that was taken from the Bible series, The Bible, that was done by Roma Downey and Mark Burnett. You may remember it. And this is a picture of Abel laying on the ground with his head bashed open. Well, I didn't really want to put that whole thing on the in a classroom full of 400 students. So what did I do? I basically darkened out almost the whole thing, but I left enough of it that it was obvious what was going on. So it actually creates a better effect than if you could see the whole thing. Because your first reaction, if you could see the whole thing, especially among the ladies in the audience, would be, ew. That doesn't help a teacher when your students are going, ew. I get that enough anyway. All right. Here's another example of a combination of using a background of one color, overlaying it with a white. So actually the picture is the one you saw earlier, the Gospel Under Siege. The whole picture is there. But I created a white box that has has a little bit of transparency, just so you know that it's the same picture. So you've created continuity with the title slide, and then I take the text that was spread out across the title slide. I just resized it, moved it over into this area, and so now I have this contrast. This makes it very easy to see what I'm talking about, and then I have light on dark, which in this situation is a lot easier to read than had I tried to put white text against that very busy background, right? So these are tricks of the trade that you use to create places for your text, create interesting slides, and actually I really didn't have to do a whole lot to accomplish this particular effect. And as you can see, this is one of the ways that I use this in teaching technical students, engineers in the Philippines. I tell them why I created the slide, and then I share what the slide means, and so it becomes an evangelistic tool, which was the whole purpose anyway, whether they realized it or not.
Before you go, what on your top title, what fill are you using there for the Gospel in 25 seconds? It's obviously a fill. Is it a standard fill, or is that a...
No, that is actually a font that has that dirty look to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hit the font?
Yes.
Can you tell us what the font is?
I can.
We're very interested in that look.
I can. It is Subway Novella. Subway Novella. There aren't too many places to use it, but some places it works well. Subway Novella. Yeah. All right. Well, looks like oh, wait a minute. I think I'm running two minutes. I guess do I have 2 minutes? Okay. Here's another way to use text and different combinations of colors. So the gospel and what must be proclaimed, understood, and believed. And so then I explained why I designed it the way I did, and then I proceeded to explain the gospel, what must be said, what must be understood, and what must be believed in order to be saved. So it becomes a good tool. Flipping text on its side is something that can only be done in moderation. but in the right situation, it creates a nice way to frame those things. Another thing that you notice, and this is again one of those situations where getting lucky is good or better than being good. It just worked out that I was able to size each of those so that it kept getting bigger. There were fewer letters, and I could make one bigger and bigger and keep the sides parallel. So again, honestly, I just got lucky.
And your color is the tones are going down as they begin.
Right, right, right. Okay, now our time's up. But there are some things that you can't get to without modifying the ribbon.
2-bar,
Right.
okay.
So you can go into, in fact, I can show you if you want to see.
I think this is interesting that I use Christmas colors and I didn't realize it.
My son say, this game has great
I do
graphics.
a lot of PowerPoint
Right,
for
right.
a business.
Yeah, or something. Right.
Uh-huh.
And I could see doing some of this stuff with it would be good.
So some of the things like like these are like center object. Let me click on that. So bring to front, send to back, align left, align top. Those aren't available or they're hard to find. But if you right click and then do customize the ribbon,
Okay,
then it gives you access to all that you can add. You can create new sections on the ribbon and yeah.
so you actually create your own 2-bar.
I do, right.
Okay.
Things that I use most often. Yep.
Okay,
Plus, I have a very high resolution screen, so I can get a lot on there.
real high.
Right. This is like 3800 or something.